Welcome back to Cinematic. We're talking about Kung Fu movies loosely defined, and this week it's gonna fit with the Shaolin Temple from 1982. And I know before I said I wasn't sure, I couldn't remember why I put this on the list. I figured it out. So it turns out it's got a whole bunch of firsts. It's the first Hong Kong, mainland China co-production, which most of everything we've seen so far has been a Hong Kong production. So this, being a co-production, was also one of the first to be filmed in mainland China because it was literally filmed at a Shaolin monastery. Apparently the film is straight up credited with somewhat helping launch the tourism boom to that very location. You can go look it up. The Wikipedia entry is literally just called Shaolin Monastery. That's the one. But when all was said and done, this was also the highest grossing film to date in China. In fact, apparently if you adjust for inflation, which I believe we're all doing nowadays, it is still the highest grossing film out of China. So a lot of firsts, but honestly, I still haven't talked about the biggest one. This is Jet Li's first film. And it's not like we've talked a lot about Yuen Biao and even Sammo and others who were around the industry in Hong Kong, at least, for a very long time before making their screen debuts, you could say. This isn't the case with Jet Li. This is his first credit on IMDb, at least. And he comes out of the gate swinging. I guess to tell you a little bit about him, he did come from the competitive scene, so it's not like he wasn't without training. In fact, he had a bunch. He was men's all-around national wushu champion 5 times before he even turned 18 years old. If you're wondering, that is not normal. Apparently he was a bit of a wunderkind. So he's largely trained in the northern styles like, and I apologize in advance, Shangquan, Fansiquan, Baguazhang, Jingjiquan, Tai Chi, Drunken Boxing, Eagle Claw, and Praying Mantis. I kind of nailed those last 4 though, actually. And this won't be the last time we see him. He's going to be back for the Once Upon a Time in China movies, Fist of Legend, and probably the Feng Sayuk films if I can actually find them. For this particular movie, it actually starts with kind of a documentary introduction where it goes through the literal Shaolin monastery and kind of shows you what's going on nowadays. It shows a trip by a man named Doshin So, who's a Japanese that studied in China, went back and forth. There's a longer story, and some of it's up for debate, I guess. So let's just say that it was very involved with showing you the actual location, which I thought was really cool, especially coming from all these movies where Shaolin styles and temples are all kind of revered in a very special way. To just start this movie with footage that's like, this is the temple, here's what's inside of it. Again, first time I'm aware of that this footage was getting out there to some extent, certainly to the States probably, where they were kind of still gobbling it up, even though it was probably, I say in decline, but this movie did freaking gangbusters, like I mentioned. But to start this movie out with kind of that documentary stuff was really cool. And it ends it with a shot of some murals and says, this movie is based on the legend 13 monks rescue the emperor, as drawn on those murals. So really cool introduction. I actually super loved it. Watched it twice. How closely this movie actually follows that story, or I guess if there's anything more to the story than the mural on the wall there, I don't know. I can tell you Jet Li plays Zhui Yuan, who is in the process of taking his monkly vows as the movie starts. And the abbot asks him if he will vow not to kill, as I think most of us have heard when it comes to Buddhism, you know, every life is precious and all that. And Jet Li's character pauses, does not answer. The abbot asks it again. He again won't answer. And then the movie cuts back to basically why he's not answering. And turns out the entire thing takes place during the transition of the Sui dynasty to the Tang dynasty. And Jet Li's character's father, Mighty Leg Chang, is killed by Wang Jianse, who is an evil general who's kind of in charge of the transition somewhat, and basically leaves Jet Li, who tries to defend his father, leaves Jet Li to die, but Jet Li kind of claws his way to, I don't think the nearby, it shows him in the desert at some point, but he eventually makes it to the Shaolin Temple where they take him in, nurse him back to health physically, but also spiritually, and that kind of becomes the arc of the film where he's dealing with his revenge fantasies in a way, which turns out he gets hooked up with kind of a mischievous contingent within the monastery of monks who have also had family members killed by the evil general. So again, how does he reconcile his lust for vengeance with his newfound Buddhist discipleship? We'll talk about whether or not that lands later. I want to tell you the good stuff first. Not that that's terribly bad, but the film truly is beautiful. I want to say shades of King Hu, but shades is probably the operative term there. I don't think they ever have a command of it necessarily like he did. And some of this might be, comparatively speaking, been watching a lot of Shaw Brothers sets from here, which I do also love. But this has lots of countryside eye candy throughout, if you're up for it. It's, again, literally shot at the Shaolin Temple. In fact, they use some nearby locations as well. There's some of the Pagoda Forest, which is literally called out as a burial ground, which is what it is. There's also some footage. I don't think this was nearby, so there's a little bit of creative geography maybe going on, but the Longmen Grottos is in there too, which are all these really cool Buddhas carved out of the side of a mountain. It's super, super beautiful as far as the photography goes, but also it lends a type of authenticity to the thing that is unmistakable. As far as the action direction goes, it's still a Kung Fu movie. I feel like I still got to talk about it, even if, all of my opinions come from just what I've seen so far. That list is out there. That's what we're talking about. It's all I have to go on. So I will say, from that point of view, kind of a mixed bag. Not to say that there isn't some very obviously accomplished martial arts going on during this movie. It just seemed a little cropped at first, and I don't know. I mean, Jackie and Sammo would really pull the camera back because they're also so technically proficient that it was kind of like, why wouldn't you? Just let them go to work. Jet Li fits in that category, but before he's truly showcased in this thing, it did feel a little close. And I'm not necessarily saying that was done to hide. Again, that's one of the tricks that directors can use to hide less accomplished actors as far as the martial arts go, bring it in close, use more cuts. Maybe there's a little bit of shaky cam in here, not enough that I could say that they're doing it on purpose. And again, not that I can say they're doing it to hide any lack of talent. There's a bunch of complicated choreography and really wild weapon work actually too, especially when it comes to the rope dart. In fact, for a bit, I thought maybe they were using actual Shaolin monks, that were just used to training for their entire lives. It doesn't, in the documentary part, say if that's something that was still going on, but it does have some really cool shots of these indentations in the stone floor that have just been put there by like thousands of years of Shaolin training. So I don't know. Again, that lends an air of authenticity that I might have carried through the rest of the film, but Jet Li is the standout. Again, immediately he shows up and you're like, oh, he's next level. Like, there's no wonder why he was put on camera, given his own film right off the bat. And there's a couple others that you'll probably recognize too, or might recognize, actually, I should say. The Sifu Tan Shuang is played by Yu Hai, who turns out was the Sifu in Man of Tai Chi as well. I couldn't place him for the longest time. Turns out that was it. There's also Hu Jiangqiang, who is basically the other guy. When he shows up on screen, you will automatically notice that he knows what he's doing, maybe a little bit more than everybody else with the exception of Jet Li, but very accomplished, very skilled. In fact, is listed as choreographer on IMDb. But when this film was up for Best Action Direction at the second Hong Kong Film Awards, it lists Yue Hui, Ma Xianda, Pan Qingfu, and Wang Senghui as the recipients. So there may have been a few Kung Fu cooks in the kitchen for this one, but it shows. But if you're showing up just to see Jet Li in action, you're also not going to be disappointed. I know, let's say he's had an interesting career. Certainly when he came to the States, he carved out his own path with stuff like Cradle to the Grave and, is it Black Mask? Was that the other one? So none of that here. This is definitely more along the lines of what we've seen so far with the other movies and more along the lines of what we'll see with him in Once Upon a Time in China and stuff like that. But he still brings it. He's still amazing to watch on screen. There's a montage, maybe the montage of the film, where he goes out to seek revenge early and then kind of gets his butt kicked. So he comes back and begins his training throughout a number of seasons in the Shaolin Temple. Whereas in other films, like the Return to the 36th Chamber, I remember there was a line that was basically, I mean, you know, some time has passed, but at some point there's just a line that's like, it's been years. And then that's kind of all you have to know, that it's been years. Here, it's a pretty cool sequence where he is literally practicing throughout the seasons. It's the most set that you'll see in the entire film, especially speaking of some of those on-location shoots and wide open spaces. So it stands out a little bit in that way, but it is a really cool sequence once it's all put together and Jet Li's doing his thing in the middle of it. Story-wise, it's a bit of an and then affair, and I use this quote so often that I really should figure out who said it. I want to say Trey Parker and or Matt Stone, but they make this distinction between movies that are kind of an and then this happened, and then this happened, as opposed to because of this, this happened, and then this happened because of that type thing. This feels more like the former. You know, it feels like a bunch of events stacked on top of each other. Sometimes when he does come back and do his training, and after he tries to seek his revenge, he becomes kind of a wanted man. So there's more than a few, maybe two, instances where he's almost caught, but then he escapes. And he's almost caught again, and then he escapes. And then for some reason, Li Shi-min turns up and is part of the picture, and we'll find out why later. But it's all just a little bit and then. But maybe we are witnessing the birth of the Chinese blockbuster, as far as I know, where, you know, it's got the visuals, if maybe the story is a little bit surface level. And I'm not even talking about that in a negative fashion, really. You know, in the States, we talk about Jaws as being the blockbuster. And, you know, I'm not saying that the story of this shark doesn't have some emotional depth along the way, but I wouldn't say that's necessarily what people talk about the most when they refer to it. So this could be kind of one of those, but it's not my biggest issue with the film, strangely enough. And this is weird. This is just going to be weird. I don't know how else to put it. The movie's a little loosey-goosey with the Buddhism, and I'm about as qualified to talk about that as I am to quantify this as the birth of the Chinese blockbuster. But it's every time they bring up kind of something that Jet Li's character does in opposition to the tenets of Buddhism, which isn't a new thread. You know, with the 36th Chamber movies, which I love, there's always that idea that the student is a little bit mischievous, a little bit immature, uneducated, wrong, you know, has a journey to go on. And Jet Li's character has that in this, and I say for the most part it's a satisfying arc, but it's like anytime he does something contrary, the monks themselves have like a quote that they just kind of hand wave it away. I shared a screenshot of this on Twitter, all the socials, where they say after he, I believe, kills a fly in the middle of taking his vows. Again, I thought I understood that every life was precious when it comes to Buddhism and whatnot, but kills the fly in the middle of it, and the quote they have there is, well, a man willing to do evil will be willing to strive for goodness. And it's in quotes, like in the subtitles too. So this could very well be coming from a sacred text that I just don't know. I'm fessing up to that wholeheartedly. But I would love to see the context, because that quote just all on its own doesn't work. Sorry. And I know they do it because we get to see him struggle with, again, his lust for revenge right up against his newfound Buddhist discipleship. I think just the fact that the monks kind of wave it off, like even later on where there is a little bit of comeuppance, he actually kills some guys, and even though that contingent of mischievous monks shows up to defend, I don't know if they themselves kill anybody in that moment. I'm going to say no, because Jet Li's character does, and is kicked out of the monastery. And something the students say, I guess at this point, so not necessarily the monk, is that Jet Li's character merely helped them, the people he killed, on their way to heaven. And again, there's a little bit of a reckoning there at that point because he does get kicked out for killing that guy. And it is an emotional moment. In fact, Jet Li, coming from the competitive scene, you know, if you're not going to tell me he wasn't working in movies up until this point, is kind of a natural actor too. And I've seen this before in his later stuff as well. I'm really plumbing the depths here, but I think I remember an interview with him for Fearless, which was the one where he's like let's just go by the Wikipedia on this one. An adult with the mentality of a child who has been raised like an animal. It was also called, Unleashed, sorry, that's what we're talking about. Also called Danny the Dog. But in interviews for that, he didn't go off about like martial arts or kung fu or any of that. He talked about the emotional journey of the character and how hard it was for him to play, stuff like that. So anyway, in this movie where he has to portray that emotional anguish of being kicked out of the monastery, he sells it. Let's just say that. And for a moment, I think, especially the way the rest of the movie goes, it does have a pretty great pacing to it. There's an escalation where by the end, the evil general has found out that he's being sheltered in the Shaolin temple to some extent. So he goes, lays siege, and begins killing, I believe kills the abbot or several of them, burns one of them alive so that they will reveal the location of Jet Li's character. And he shows up anyway. And it's this big, just huge kind of epic fight. So I think there's a moment where they're going to say something about that escalation, because by the end, the abbots are calling for blood, or one of them is at the very least. That contingent of kind of warrior monks shows back up and they do some killing. So I feel like they're headed towards some sort of a statement in that regard, but not really. It turns out the Li Shimin, who showed up for like a second and then left, turns out he was the son of the Tang Emperor. So he shows up with his army in kind of a Deus Ex Machina moment, and they win the day. And it cuts back to that same moment where Jet Li's character is taking his vow and has been asked if he will take the vow not to kill. And in what seems like another just hedging their Buddhist bets, he takes the vow to not kill, but says, except to defend justice, which absolutely, sure. But shortly after that is the vow of celibacy, which there is a moment between him and the love interest of the movie, I'm sorry, Ding Lan, who does a fantastic job with the very little that she's given. He accepts that vow, and then the last vow is the one to abstain from alcohol. And the emperor steps into the room and says, you might not want to do that one because we're celebrating our victory out here. And so the monk's like, okay, the emperor says it's fine, so you don't have to do that one either. I don't know. Again, I'm fully aware this all seems like a very weird complaint to have, but I at least maybe feel a little uneasy with me when the head of state walks in and dictates to the religion what they should do, or condones or changes, or I don't know. I don't even know. At the end of the day, it's a good movie that's also a decent historical document. Again, not just for that beginning part, because again, it was this mainland co-production that showcases Jet Li as the real deal from the very beginning. I'm just not sure maybe it rises above the sum of its parts, let's say, regardless of how good it still is. And even if I can't put my finger on it exactly, I'll tell you what, it feels like, even if it's just a difference between Hong Kong and the mainland, it feels like somebody taking something that had been wildly popular up until then. Again, even if Kung Fu was slightly on the wane in the United States or however it was, took something that was huge at one point and kind of made their own version of it. So I couldn't necessarily tell you, especially, I'm sure there's a lot lost in translation here, but it does feel a little bit left of center in that way while still being good. I don't know. That makes sense. Shaolin Temple, go check it out. Next time, we are going to, I don't know if we're going to return or continue to talk about the evolution here with Zoo Warriors from the Magic Mountain from 1983, if everything goes according to plan. And I can tell you at least one of the reasons why this made the list was for the director, Sui Hark, who is a name that will continue to come up. And by next time, I should be able to tell you why. So if that sounds cool, you can find me as always on all those socials, but also on patreon.com/Ryan_runs_. You can be part of the people that tell me I should keep doing this. And speaking of which,